Let's begin the presentation today. We have the pleasure of having Amelia Conrado, the 5 College Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies Distinguished Latin American Visitor. This is the second visitor that we have from Latin America in a program of that has been sponsored by the visiting residencies of the 5 Colleges Inc. And Nate Therian, who is from the 5 Colleges Inc., is the one who's going to explain to you what these collaborations in between the 5 colleges mean. And this is the second week in a row that we have an event that have to do with Brazil in the last 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, 2 events in a row that have to do with Brazil. And we are very happy to have such a distinguished performer and professor from Brazil visiting us. And I'm going to then leave this for the people who know her better or know the residencies better. Nate Therian from the 5 colleges is going to talk about the residents of the 5 colleges, and then Lucia Suarez, who's a professor in Amherst College and is the person who is personally responsible for the contact with Amelia Conrado, introduce her, and then they're going to have the presentation.
Actually, my real function is to welcome our guest because it's a wonderful thing to be able to have her here. The 5 colleges, as you know, is the consortium that connects UMass and Amherst and Hampshire and Holyoke and Smith. And there are many 5 college programs, academic programs, that bring together faculty members and students from all 5 campuses to do stuff together. And your work actually connects up to so many projects that are underway here at 5 colleges: African studies, Latin American, Latino studies, dance, music. So you're bringing us all together in a wonderful, wonderful way. The residency program was created about 5 years ago to support projects that want to expand their thinking in ways. And the Latin American, Latino Studies, and the Caribbean Studies group a couple years back began thinking seriously about ways of embodying in the curriculum translatinidades in a big way. And they thought one of the ways to do that would be to bring people who were doing this kind of work from Latin America to be here for extended periods of time, to work with our faculty members and with students and others in the community to think about how they might transform the curriculum to kind of catch up with the scholarship, and also to help our faculty members think about their scholarship in new ways. So your presence here is helping that in an important way. There are many other residencies that 5 colleges have sponsored over the last several years, several based right here at UMass. The Center for Public Policy has put together a 2 years worth of residencies by practitioners in social justice areas who are bringing together policy analysis and struggles for social justice. We had a group of people from Smith and Hampshire working around childhood studies. The 5 college opera people wanted to get consultants in here to think that would help them think about how to run an opera across 5 campuses in new ways. We actually have someone here too for this year and next who's working to bring dance into the communities of Holyoke and Springfield, and to help our dance faculty think about their curriculum in ways that would connect it to what's happening in our communities and in the high schools of our communities, to bring dance into the curriculum there. So there are many things that we're trying to do through these residency programs. I've got to say, Latin American Studies, Latino Studies has sort of led the way in working this residency, making this residency work both for a transformation of the curriculum and for the advancement of scholarship. So anyway, I'm very, very happy to be a co-sponsor of this event, and I'm looking forward to the talk. Because I think you will bring warmth into our cold New England climate just by being here at my talk. Thank you.
I'm going to do the introductions, and before I do any introducing, I want to say thank you. This is a collaboration, and it's a really very special collaboration. I feel very grateful that we're all getting together and able to see faces from Smith and UMass and different, the different colleges all working together. So I want to say thanks to the 5 College Latin American Studies Council, to the Center for Latin American and Caribbean and Latino Studies, to the 5 College Luso-Brazilian Working Group, to the 5 Colleges Dance Department, because they're also getting together and putting together classes, so it's very exciting. And then personal thanks go to Gloria Bernabé Ramos, the emails that have, the food, she arranged that, they're getting this fabulous space. It's Gloria, so gracias, Gloria. Sarah Lintz is not here, but she gets a very heartfelt thank you from me and from our guests. Joanna Walker, Juana Arias, Denise. I mean, this is not something that gets put together by one person, and all I can say is thank you. And if I have left anyone out, give a shout out. I'll say your name, and I'm just, that always happens, right? So, and we're just really deeply grateful to everyone. And so that said, we'll get to our presentation. It's going to have several parts because we have a language issue, and I figured that there would be a fun way to make it, a little bit of the lecture and a little bit of bate-papo, or really, Q&A, where you guys get to ask questions that come to mind and that they get to answer with their fountain of fonte de informação. The information is phenomenal. And also thank you to Julian, there you go, I already forgot that, who has done the translation. It always happens. So I'm going to start really quickly introducing how this project started. 7.5, I'm almost in pain to say, 8 years ago, I went to Brazil to do research on my own solo book. And I was interviewing Amelia. And for the past 8 years, I've been going to Brazil to interview Amelia because she is the subject of the 5th chapter of my book. And as we became friends and colleagues and started doing things together, we started realizing that going down to Brazil to do all this work on these people isn't enough. I mean, I really just like collaboration, community. That's what the subject that we're studying is. Why aren't we doing more of it? And so, Amelia and I started talking, and I put together a conference at LASA. That was the beginning in Canada. And then she put together a conference in Brazil. And so for basically the past 4 years, we have been in conversation across the continent. We're Canada, US, Brazil, I'm down there, and now we have them up here. And the conversation has been around the subject of not the cultural agents as the way that I'm studying them, but the cultural agents, their own voices, our own collaborations, and cultural agency from a different way of speaking and writing. So this is the introduction to our book that we're co-editing, Dance, Race, and Nation from in Bahia. And you can read this really quickly. You've been probably looking at it for a while, but it's gathering some of the top scholars and activists and dancers who are working in the communities and in the college to discuss these issues of Afro-Bahian dance, the way it responds to sociopolitical notions of race, nation, and community, the way it resists stereotypes and redefines, translates African and Brazilian traditions. And so I've already explained this. We've been collaborating for about good 4 years as a group. And the questions that we put together that were thought of to ask our collaborators, because we have a total of 12 collaborators in our book. And the questions that each one is the questions asked of them, they might be answering all of them or one or the other, are what are the ways in which marketing and media have informed dances of African diaspora diversity dispersion in Bahia? What has your role been in this? Because we're talking about amazing scholars and activists. How have you been shaped by the Afro-Bahian dance experience? In a crisis global economy riddled by violence and disaffection, do the dance arts salvage and re-educate individuals? Is there a hype that ignores limitations on formal education and unbreakable impasses to active citizenship? How do the evangelical movements affect the valorization or devaluation of African dance and traditions? Finally, how do dancers, choreographers, researchers, and cultural community centers create spaces of reflection and action for interactive consciousness building? What kinds of networks of employment, collaboration, and exchanges would best give visibility to cultural agents committed to Afro-Bahian dance arts? That said, we move on to one of the chapters in the book, which is actually the first chapter, and it's Amelia's chapter. And it's a chapter that sets up, I history of dance education and dance work. So she's presenting Afro-Bahian dance, education, history, and political action. And I would love to give a strong hand of welcome to Amelia. And so, part two is that Amelia speaks Portuguese, and so we figured that a very organized way of doing this was that we picked out sections of her chapter that are kind of give you a little taste of what the chapter includes. And she'll be reading it in Portuguese, because you should listen to her and not me, right? And I'll be, the translation done by Julian will be read by me. And they're tidbits, so write notes, whatever you feel like I didn't hear, I want to know, you didn't tell me. Write the question immediately, because this is a 40-page chapter. And you're getting these tidbits, right? And so then after that, we're going to open the salon. We have pictures, and you can ask those questions of these, what questions arose from your tidbits that you got, right? And what affirmations, what challenges. And then Amelia has an amazing series of pictures to talk about and to exemplify some of the issues that she's talking about. So we'll leave it at this and start. Amelia. Você gostar? Você quer usar isso?
Claro que sim. Antes de boa tarde a todos, né, as pessoas presentes. Antes de eu entrar no tema específico da minha fala, eu gostaria de dizer que isso, para mim, que sou uma professora da Faculdade de Educação da Universidade Federal da Bahia, é um momento de muita honra.
Well, as a member of the education faculty, this is a big honor for me to be here. Before beginning to talk about what the topic of the talk is.
Além da universidade em que eu sou professora, eu também sou atuante junto a comunidades negras, e o fato de eu botar esse tecido que vocês estão vendo, isso representa o Ileaie, um bloco afro de uma comunidade pobre, e eles me disseram, quando você sentar na sua primeira atividade, você vai estar junto conosco.
Other than being a professor at the university, I'm also a member of the Bloco Ileaie, and this fabric that I have is one that they gave me and told me that whenever you come and perform with us, this is something that is a sign of that membership.
Antes também de qualquer coisa, dizer que o encontro, né, da professora Lucia no Brasil, porque ir ao Brasil é muito difícil, é um país difícil. Foi possível essa aproximação, e hoje nós estamos, né, dois continentes, América do Norte e América do Sul, juntos. Isso é um momento muito especial.
Brazil is a difficult place to get to sometimes, and having met Lucia in Brazil, it's been great to have this collaboration between us across countries.
Eu com isso trazemos algumas questões que buscaremos responder no decorrer da nossa discussão. Como exemplo, quais são os fatores que impedem os agentes culturais das danças afro-baianas obterem uma qualidade de vida justa pelo trabalho que oferecem à sociedade no nível da formação de pessoas que fazem? Você quer ir?
Você segue, então depois assim, até o número 2.
Tá bom? Como se explica na Bahia, com os seus núcleos culturais afro-baianos, os terreiros de candomblé, as escolas, os grupos de capoeira, os afoxés, os blocos afros, os grupos de manifestações e danças, que são os lugares de onde se originam um certo conhecimento cultural e suas formas expressivas, em sua maioria constituído por comunidades negras, permanecem desassistidos pelas instituições políticas, governamentais do meu estado e do meu país. Lamentavelmente, e de maneira crescente, vem acontecendo da saída desses para fora do seu país de origem, do Brasil, buscando residência no exterior, na expectativa de serem absolvidos nos países europeus, nos países norte-americanos, asiáticos, para ensinar dança, música, capoeira, percussão, canto, na perspectiva de, entre aspas, serem pagos e viverem de sua cultura, de sua arte e cultura. Condição que, infelizmente, né, o meu país, o Brasil, não acontece de forma favorável. Diante do fato citado, tudo leva a crer que é devido à relação de desigualdade social, desigualdades sociais latente na minha sociedade, né? Onde quem tem o poder econômico domina e explora aqueles que não têm. Explica-se a situação de dependência, carência, pobreza, que geralmente as pessoas das comunidades negras estão submetidas, mesmo estas possuindo um qualificado nível de conhecimento a partir de sua cultura, que eu considero. É por tal motivo que as lutas deflagradas pelos movimentos negros contemporâneos em prol de uma memória, uma história africana, uma política de reparação e justiça, a elevação do nível educacional da população negra na África e em todos os países da diáspora, a preservação de tradições, costumes, valores e conhecimentos, é que reconhecemos a importância das danças enquanto uma linguagem do sensível, do corpo, da sabedoria e da consciência.
We focus on understanding the diverse expression of Afro dances in Bahia by way of the complexities and contradictions that they reveal, namely the tensions, confrontations, and negations of opposing cultural groups and the obstacles to prominence and legitimation that Afro-Bahian cultural agents face in carrying out their work, whether they be dancers, professors, producers, directors, entrepreneurs, choreographers, researchers, or even the leaders and caretakers of candomblés, afouchés, and capoeira schools, among other practices. We ultimately want to emphasize their positive sociocultural and educational contributions. For example, we attempt to determine the factors that inhibit cultural agents in Afro-Bahian dance from making a living off of the formative experiences that their work provides members of society, as well as explain the continued absence of state and federal governmental institutions in the hotbeds of Afro-Bahian culture, the terreiros, the afouchés, the blocos afros, the capoeira schools, and traditional dance groups, where Black communities have established their own cultural knowledge and expressive form. Unfortunately, the knowledge that these agents acquire through their engagement with these cultural nexuses, where dance itself engages in dialogue with various other languages, has, more so recently than in the past, come by way of their departure from these centers to places outside of their home country in the hopes of assimilating into European, North American, and Asian communities as teachers of dance, music, capoeira, percussion, and singing. These cultural agents look to get paid and live off of their art and culture, opportunities which sadly our country lacks. The facts mentioned above indicate that the state of poverty and lack of basic necessities generally afflicting Black communities, including those whose local cultures provide a means of acquiring knowledge, are a consequence of latent inequalities in our society, in which those who hold economic influence dominate and exploit those who do not. It is for this reason that we recognize the importance of dance, particularly as a sensory, somatic language requiring considerate conscience and wisdom in relation to battles mounted by movimentos negros, modern Black movements, to advance policies supporting reparations and justice, elevate the quality of education in Africa and its diasporic communities, preserve traditions, customs, values, and knowledge, and sustain African history and memory.
Danças afro, a relação de raça, identidade e educação. A importância desse debate integra uma obra composta por cientistas de diversos lugares, com pontos de vistas e abordagens diferentes. Motivou a buscar livros que colocassem em questão coisas que acontecem nos Estados Unidos e também no Brasil, pois ambas as sociedades possuem suas bases históricas, similitudes e diferenças. Do nosso ponto de vista, não temos motivo para, entre aspas, se orgulhar do nosso país, fecha aspas, pois a nossa realidade ela tem se tornado vergonhosa. Para qualquer cidadão, não há explicações convincentes para se compreender como o Brasil hoje, entre os 10 países de maior economia do mundo, e ao mesmo tempo possui os piores índices de desenvolvimento humano, onde o acesso à educação é precário, mantendo historicamente uma população de baixo nível escolar e de informação, se comparados a sociedades que apresentam os melhores resultados. Infelizmente, temos as piores condições de moradias e saneamento básico nas cidades urbanas do Nordeste e do Norte, a Amazônia, a marginalidade de jovens aumentando dia a dia, entre outros tristes fatos. Então, essa potência econômica, entre aspas, não se transforma em qualidade de vida e ascensão para o cidadão brasileiro. Mas as ilhas de ostentação e riquezas, de uma determinada elite política e empresarial que se apropria e desvia o dinheiro público. Entretanto, os Estados Unidos e o Brasil têm uma história de colonização europeia, sendo que o primeiro pela dominação inglesa e o segundo pelos portugueses. Mas será que isso justifica as aviltantes diferenças entre uma realidade e a outra? Bom, eu deixo para os sociólogos e os economistas responderem. Não sei se é possível.
Sim, mas...
O sociólogo brasileiro Roberto da Mata escreveu um livro baseado na sua convivência na sociedade americana. E por muitos anos que ele aqui morou, ele fez comparações entre o Brasil e os Estados Unidos. Achamos conveniente trazer suas impressões para abordar a relação entre raça e etnia, porque nos remete a exemplos práticos para entender essa relação. Da Mata percebe que nos Estados Unidos se cria micropaíses, etnias, dentro de um país. E ele ressalta que, abre aspas, a sociedade americana divide com pouquíssimas ou nenhuma ambiguidade negros e brancos, italianos e judeus, poloneses e hispânicos, com uma sociabilidade se ancoram no espaço. Atravessar uma rua equivale às vezes a cruzar uma fronteira. Fecha aspas. Este autor diz que todo brasileiro, quando está naquela realidade, sente o modo como os americanos ordenam a diversidade de línguas e culturas que integram seu sistema social. Seus argumentos chegam a concluir que ambas as sociedades, americana e brasileira, possuem modalidades diversas de classificação étnica e adotou estilos diferenciados, embora convergentes, de lidar com o problema. Chega, portanto, à seguinte constatação. Abre aspas, o preconceito americano desemboca num racismo vociferante e explícito que segue o credo de, entre aspas, iguais mas separados. Nele os obstáculos são claros. Já o preconceito brasileiro fica escondido. Somos desiguais, entre aspas, mas estamos juntos. Não sei se é claro.
So this is the section. She's got 4 sections in the chapter, and this is an introduction to one of the sections called Afro Dances in Relation to Race, Identity, and Education. The importance of this debate, the product of investigations by researchers from various places with different points of view and approaches, has led us to search for texts which address events that happen both in the United States and Brazil, given that both societies share certain aspects of their historical foundation while remaining distinct for other reasons. From our perspective, priding ourselves in our country is not a source of motivation, considering that our reality is disgraceful. For any aware citizen, there is no explanation for how Brazil is today among the 10th largest economies on earth, but at the same time has the worst index of human development, boasts very unreliable access to education, and has a population with low levels of education and access to information compared to the societies leading in these categories. We have the worst living conditions and basic health benefits in northern and northeastern cities, where, among other saddening statistics, young people are increasingly marginalized. This economic robustness has not translated into quality of life and upward social mobility for the average Brazilian citizen, so much that it has fueled the creation of oases of wealth and conspicuous consumption populated by business people and the political elite who appropriate and siphon off public funds. All the same, the United States and Brazil share a history of European colonization by the English and the Portuguese, respectively. But does this justify the degrading differences between one country's reality and the other's? We will leave this question to economists and sociologists. Among these, Brazilian sociologist Roberto da Mata wrote a book based upon his residence for a number of years in the United States, in which he compares society there with that of his home country, Brazil. Of most use to us are his impressions of the approach to race and ethnicity in each country, because it offers practical examples which allow us to understand their relationship. In the United States, the Mata notes, the formation of ethnic enclaves emphasizing the extent to which, quote, North American society is divided with little to no ambiguity between whites and blacks, Italians and Jews, Polish and Hispanic, considering that social relations are anchored in space, crossing a street is somewhat equivalent to crossing a border, end quote. That's the Mata. He says that when they encounter that reality, every Brazilian is made sensitive to the ways that the diverse languages and cultures which make up society in the United States are categorized. He concludes that both societies, Brazilian and North American, have implemented different, though convergent techniques in their classification of ethnicity. In the United States, the dominant credo is separate but equal, and the obstacles to bridging these gaps are clear. In Brazil, however, they are not, and unequal but together is the prevailing philosophy. The Mata acknowledges the difficulties in comprehending racism as a socio-political problem and argues that both societies require many changes, from greater awareness of their own history and of the lingering marks of slavery to reflection on unacceptable prejudice and discrimination. Major Brazilian thinkers like Gilberto Freire, with his numerous sociological works, have influenced and reinforced the Brazilian mentality regarding the country's ethno-racial relations, interpreting them as a harmonious confluence of formative populations without explicitly referencing the violence and disrespect that blacks and natives suffered through, thereby solidifying the false so-called myth of racial democracy. Vamos lá? E aqui, antes de Casa Grande do Senzala, você chegou até lá, e a Paula Plante.
Bom, esta forma escamoteada de conviver com o racismo, né, eu diria, entre esses dois países, ainda perdura até a atualidade. E é por isso que muitos brasileiros não têm consciência do problema da desigualdade social que há entre nós. Onde a questão racial categoriza aqueles que têm acesso a uma determinada qualidade de vida daqueles que não têm. Trazendo um breve recorte na visão de Freire, né, retirada da obra importante Casa Grande Senzala, vimos que, entre aspas, híbrida desde o início, a sociedade brasileira é de todas da América a que se constituiu harmoniosamente quanto às relações de raça. Dentro de um ambiente quase reciprocamente cultural que resultou no máximo de aproveitamento dos valores e experiências dos povos atrasados pelo adiantado, fecha aspas. Esta visão de, entre aspas, povos adiantados, fecha aspas, e povos atrasados, fecha aspas, permanece sendo afirmado na contemporaneidade, já com outras concepções, tais como, entre aspas, países desenvolvidos, fecha aspas, países em desenvolvimento, fecha aspas. As experiências que obtemos na vida artística e profissional, no campo da dança, que ao falarmos danças afro-brasileiras, tem como princípio a coletividade, a sociabilidade, os sentidos profundos de conexão com a pessoa, com a terra, com a biodiversidade, com o mar, com os rios, com as matas, e por tal capacidade, seus valores falam de sentimentos. Tal qualidade tem sido perdida diante dos valores das sociedades modernas, aonde o consumo, a exploração se destacam. É aí que entram em choque os diferentes valores entre as sociedades local e global.
This deceptive form of describing what by all measures is actually racism endures to this day. Therefore, many Brazilians have no sense of the social inequality among us, especially with regards to how race determines access, or lack thereof, to a certain quality of life. A snippet of Freire's Casa Grande Senzala, which is translated in 2003, The Masters and the Slaves, illustrates his perspective. And quote, hybrid from the beginning, Brazil's society has, among American societies, constructed itself harmoniously with respect to race relations. The atmosphere of cultural exchange allowed the advanced populace to take advantage of the values and experiences of the backwards, end quote. His vision of advanced and backwards populations has survived to the present day, though perhaps under different guises, like the terminology of, quote, developed and developing nations, end quote. The experiences we have as artists and professionals in the world of dance, when speaking of Afro-Bahian dance, spring from collectivity, sociability, and the profound links between individuals, the earth, biodiversity, the sea, rivers, and the jungle. The sentiments that these values reflect have been lost amongst those of modern societies, where consumption and exploitation dominate. The intersection of these two conflicting sets of values occurs at the boundary between the local and global.
As ações políticas e dança afro, prováveis mudança. O movimento negro no Brasil acredita em uma importante estratégia de luta para combater o racismo e a discriminação, que é elevar o nível de educação da nossa sociedade, a partir da consciência e enfrentamento aos graves problemas. A dança recriada por algumas escolas não formais e grupos artístico-culturais alimenta-se desses códigos, redimensionam, recriam, construindo uma linguagem técnica de dança de alto nível e de repertório rico e criativo, pois, nessa dimensão, os códigos de movimento são abertos. Cada dançarino, professor, coreógrafo, seguro dos seus princípios fundamentais gerados da mesma, a desenvolve conforme seu potencial e do grupo de atuação. Mesmo sendo um código aberto a muitas leituras, o que essa dança transmite pelos seus movimentos, suas coreografias, suas músicas, suas roupas, os instrumentos, a encenação, assim como a complexidade e diversidade técnica para seu aprendizado e execução, leva a encontrar os caminhos para a sua compreensão histórica, filosófica, identitária, subsidiando no âmbito da educação a afirmação de uma epistemologia, ou seja, uma teoria de conhecimento e uma metodologia de ensino e pesquisa na contemporaneidade.
So this is from part 3 of her chapter, and it's called Probable Changes in Political Action and Afro-Bahian Dance. The African Black movement in Brazil puts great faith in elevating our society's quality of education, especially with respect to developing a conscience and willingness to confront its deep-seated problems as a means of combating racism and discrimination. The dance is recreated by some informal schools and artistic cultural groups, draws from these religious codes. So she had been talking about religious codes in another section that was pulled out, but you can ask, that'll be great in the conversation. Reconfiguring and reimagining them to construct a high-level language of dance and a rich creative repertoire. As a result, the inventory of movements is open, and that each dancer, professor, and choreographer can be confident in their use of the fundamental principles that they have learned and continue to build upon, and their group explore their potential further. In addition, through the code of symbols, references, and movements, it's open to many what the dancers can transmit via this choreography, music attire, instruments, and setting in a complex and diverse. Various techniques can be used to teach and execute them. Therefore, they can lead to new channels of historical and philosophical comprehension, as well as self-awareness. With educational support, they also aid in the formation of a distinct epistemology. That is, they lead to new theories of knowledge, pedagogy, and research, even to this day, or more particularly now. Although it is difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain who first envisioned the societal place of African dance schools or Afro-Bahian dance schools in the readings that we have done concerning dances of African origin in Brazil or in other texts, whether they be classical or contemporary, Amanda, I am sure that one of their motivations was to establish schools according to the model that predominates today. In observing that in the current century of Afro school spaces are only becoming more institutionalized, we can see that they continue to demand affirmation of their rightful place in society. Hola? Okay.
Afirmamos que, neste século, está se dando uma maior institucionalização de espaços e escolas na referência cultural afro, pois permanecem em conquista de afirmação de seu lugar social. Reconhecimento de espaços e escolas como terreiros e blocos afro. Pelo estudo, nós vamos compreendendo, como perspectiva de uma educação multicultural, princípios de respeito ao trato do conhecimento de culturas diferentes que coexistem sem que nenhuma se sobreponha à outra, desenvolvidas de forma anti-autoritária, com a libertação dos corpos, do diálogo multicultural, da satisfação, cumplicidade, alegria de ensinar e aprender, entre outros elementos que podem se somar a mito, ao sonho, à realidade e à realização. No Brasil, as inspirações a tal proposta estão vindo e se alicerçando de experiências bem-sucedidas de núcleos culturais afro-brasileiros e seus projetos socioeducacionais, assim como outras experiências vindo de culturas não hegemônicas. Para tanto, o exercício e a instituição desta prática educativa precisa contemplar os princípios identificados como fundamentais, e esses devem ser conscientes e decididos enquanto um projeto pedagógico. Pela riqueza e diversidade da capoeira na cultura baiana, brasileira e hoje eu diria transcultural, é preciso que se tenha um olhar amplo e cuidadoso para entender e respeitar a trajetória e história desse movimento cultural, a capoeira, composto por numerosa comunidade, a capoeirística, discernindo o que é próprio da cultura dessa e o que é desvirtuado dela, para assim extrair diálogos e ações em direção à exigência de uma forma urgente para políticas, inclusive de sua proteção no Brasil, porque tanto ela como seus atores, os mestres, têm contribuído continuadamente para o engrandecimento local, nacional e mundial. Mas pouca atenção no Brasil, pelos poderes públicos, não tem sido dado no sentido de atender às suas necessidades de manutenção, preservação e proteção. Ressaltamos que a capoeira Angola é a que mais tem sofrido com o descaso e por isso requer, em prioridade, atenção especial. Então eu trago a capoeira como símbolo de cultura transnacional.
Okay. Over the course of our studies, we have come to understand the significance of multicultural education, awareness and respect of coexistent cultures without one culture superimposing itself on the another. In the cultivation of principles of anti-authoritarianism, corporeal liberation, multicultural dialogue, satisfaction, and the pursuit of happiness in teaching and learning, among other elements which belong to this myth, dream, and reality. In Brazil, the foundation is being laid for the fulfillment of these goals by Afro-Brazilian groups and their socio-educational projects, as well as by the experiences of other non-hegemonic cultures. To continue to exercise and institute these institutional practices, it is necessary that the aforementioned principles be considered fundamental tenets of any pedagogical undertaking. For example, given the richness and diversity of capoeira in Bahian culture, it is necessary to maintain a broad, keen-eyed perspective to respect the trajectory and history of the multifaceted cultural movement and to be able to discern what genuinely belongs to it and what exists only as a consequence of its misinterpretation. Therefore, dialogue and action to implement policies for its protection are urgent, especially considering how much the culture and its producers have continuously contributed to local, national, and global awareness, and how little attention public institutions have paid to them, at least in terms of attending to their basic maintenance, preservation, and protection. Capoeira Angola, as an example, has in fact suffered the most from this neglect. As such, it requires special attention. And we were finding it because I didn't get the rest of it. So it's Capoeira Angola, that section. I can transfer it into the thing. So eu posso falar disso depois, mas continua.
Conclusão. A capoeira, para mim, é um exemplo, conhecido, como uma linguagem conhecida mundialmente, e eu trago como um exemplo de síntese, para que a gente perceba que ela é um espaço privilegiado de pluralidade, de convivência, onde pessoas de diferentes idades, nacionalidades, sexo, etnia, nível cultural interagem. E é fundamental acentuar que, através dela, o exercício do respeito entre as diferentes culturas, das relações pessoais, em equilíbrio de força, do lugar de cada um, aproveitando e criando oportunidades de destacar questões dessa natureza, contribui para uma mudança de postura e educação que poderá se expandir para outros espaços. Nas relações existentes entre escolas de formação desse segmento de dança, a capoeira é dança, Não sendo regra geral, encontra-se também posturas autoritárias, assim como se observa no espaço da universidade. Seja onde for, essas posturas elas devem ser combatidas e criticadas. Naquelas escolas, na capoeira, compreende-se a existência, até pela falta de acesso no Brasil, às atualizações e avanços na educação formal. Por conta disso, para uma política de educação multicultural que se pauta nas relações anti-autoritárias e na instituição de gestão democrática, precisa se estabelecer convênios entre escolas das redes, núcleos culturais afro-brasileiros, de forma a descentralizar a extensão dos espaços pedagógicos, valorização de outras categorias profissionais e também consolidar a troca de conhecimentos entre os diferentes, né, frente às necessidades apontadas e acordadas de uma parte e de outra.
It is of utmost importance because of the pluralistic position that capoeira occupies, allowing people of different ages, nationalities, sexes, and cultures to interact. This makes it possible to advance, through its preservation, respect between different cultures and people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. It also facilitates raising questions about these issues, ultimately bringing about changes which could then expand into other social spheres. In many schools of Afro dance, however, authoritarian attitudes persist, similar to those that are typical of universities, though there are certainly exceptions to this rule. Regardless, these postures should be criticized and contested, and she can talk about that in a little bit. We can ask her. The existence of these kinds of relationships in schools can be understood as a consequence of their inadequate access to advances in formal education. Therefore, in order to implement multicultural education based upon anti-authoritarian democratic management, there must be an accord between online schools and Afro-Brazilian schools that would act as a decentralizing force, expand the pedagogical domain, empower other professions, and finally advance the exchange of knowledge according to the needs of the groups involved. This professionalization of non-university schooling should be revered, respected, and well-funded. Should be is the operative word here. Particularly considering its potential social influence. For this to happen, universities would also have to embrace these schools' findings as they have with Ileaye. She'll be talking about Ileaye informally. To give these schools the opportunity to pursue systematic educational studies within the realm of Afro-Brazilian culture and underfunded, underserved communities, not to mention the opportunities to have their values and findings deservedly recognized, they must be adequately funded. Only this way can they conduct research and implement extensive projects and educational activities that would consequently produce more didactic pedagogical material. In bringing to light different pedagogical schools of thought and assessing how differently these interests and principles are regarded in the history of humanity, we remain certain that an understanding of these different philosophies and histories is fundamental, as is the knowledge that laws and human rights must be considered alongside the contents of school curriculum, because an institution that teaches critical thinking as well as awareness of social inequality and exclusion is vital in the current state of the world. Eu terminei para você. Você tem que terminar em português.
Bom, a nossa proposta, concluindo, né, a nossa proposta de estudo, ao ressaltar, mesmo em síntese, os diferentes pensamentos, né, da pedagogia das danças, com suas finalidades, interesses e princípios que mostram diferentes histórias na humanidade. Ficamos certas de que tanto o conhecimento de filosofias e histórias pedagógicas, assim como o conhecimento de leis e direitos humanos, precisam ser tratados conjuntamente aos conteúdos da escola, pois a instituição de uma educação cidadã, crítica e atenta aos problemas de exclusão e desigualdade é imprescindível na nossa realidade local e mundial. Eu agora gostaria de concluir mostrando as fotos, né?
And so she's going to show some pictures. And Amélia, você vai contar um pouco a história, especialmente desse da. Eu depois falo para você, tá bom? Okay, so these are the pictures from Ileaye. Você gostasse de falar um pouco sobre o trabalho de Ileaye diretamente? Aqui a Juliana vai fazendo a tradução.
Este é um bloco de carnaval que surgiu na década de 70 na Bahia, o local onde eu moro.
So Ileaye is a bloco de carnaval, which is the name for a group, basically of groups that are participating in the carnaval. That originated in Bahia, which is where Dr. Amelia is from.
Ileaie significa casa de todo mundo.
Ileaie means house of the world.
O Ileaie surgiu porque na década de 70 era um período de ditadura militar, né, de 22 anos que o Brasil era governado por generais.
Ileaie came to be in the 70s after a 22-year-long dictatorship that ruled in Brazil.
Aonde os artistas, os intelectuais eram perseguidos, eram mortos.
During this time, during the dictatorship, intellectuals and artists were persecuted and killed.
E foi uma época muito dura, onde as instituições, a cultura negra, ela foi muito perseguida, mas também se escondeu muito para permanecer viva.
During this time, lots of the black communities and organizations within the black communities were persecuted, and for that reason hid themselves or obscured their activities in order to stay alive and to endure.
Passado esse período, os negros que trabalhavam, principalmente com o petróleo, tinham o desejo de também sair no carnaval, ter seu espaço de lazer e ludicidade, né?
Petróleo é trabalhar na indústria.
Na indústria do petróleo e outros lugares, né?
And so black Brazilians who were involved beyond artistic endeavors in industries such as the oil industry also wanted to become involved in the kind of artistic production that was going on with the carnaval.
Economicamente, eles tinham dinheiro, queriam entrar nos grupos, nos clubes, e eram impedidos porque eram negros.
These business people who were involved and had money from their kind of business pursuits were attempting to involve themselves in these black communities, but were stopped from doing so.
Então,
Because they were black.
Right.
So it's the inverse, is that they wanted to get involve themselves into the business community, but because they were black, they weren't allowed in. And so Ileaie responds to that.
As pessoas como platformistas ou trabalhador?
People in general.
Eram trabalhadores. E pelo fato da negação de entrarem em grupos de carnaval, em clubes, né, eles perceberam que o racismo era muito forte. E por isso criaram um bloco de carnaval só de negros.
So, because they were barred from joining these groups, they started other groups, the Bloco Jafro, that were based upon being black, whereas being black was kind of one of their foundational principles.
No primeiro ano em que saíram às ruas, foram perseguidos e apanharam, né, mas permaneceram como bloco de carnaval.
So in the first year that they kind of were part of the carnaval, they were persecuted, but nonetheless they endured.
O fato mais interessante, segundo PowerPoint, podemos passar, é que no ano de 2014, a este momento, que é o carnaval no Brasil, o Ileaie está completando 40 anos.
So as you can tell from the poster, the current year's 2014's Carnival is celebrating the 40th anniversary of Ileaie's involvement in the Carnival.
40 anos de trabalho, ter o carnaval como fundo, mas na verdade é um espaço de educação e consciência, mas não de um racismo ao contrário, mas de uma luta para que o mundo se respeite e respeite a diferença.
So after 40 years of being in Carnival, it's important to note that their involvement in Carnival, in the Carnaval, is not a way of kind of a reverse racism, but more of a platform in which they can enact a different kind of respect for diversity on racial terms.
A ação, o trabalho do Ileaie envolve muitas ações. Uma banda musical, uma escola, né, de educação formal, uma fábrica de produtos do próprio carnaval, da própria cultura, e um debate de consciência política e étnica.
So there are many facets to Ileaie's productions and to their work. They have a musical band, which if you go back you can see pictures of in the top left. And beyond that, they have a school, so formal education is also part of the work that they do. They have a kind of a factory where they produce usually a roupa,
Roupa.
where they produce largely the clothing that gets worn for the carnavals. And que foi a última coisa que eu consegui?
E de consciência, né, um trabalho de consciência política, sua história étnica.
And ultimately, they strive to have a debate or to make the debate about ethnic and racial consciousness persist.
Isso tem uma iniciativa local, mexeu com a consciência no Brasil, tem mexido nos 40 anos com uma consciência, uma referência no Brasil.
So over the 40 years, this kind of conversation has happened through the ILEAE and the work that they've done.
Você pode passar. Eu fiquei surpresa quando morei com meu esposo um ano em Paris para fazer o pós-doutorado, onde em Paris eles sabiam o que era a Noite da Beleza Negra.
I was surprised to learn that during my year in Paris working on postdoctoral work with my husband, that they knew about ILEAE's work in Brazil.
Então eu tomei consciência de que essa referência cultural ela tem se expandido, né, em termos de pensar uma estética ou respeitar uma estética da diferença, uma forma de ser diferente, né, e um desejo de transformação.
So it was during that time that I became aware that this kind of understanding aesthetic differences and of this kind of racial respect had expanded beyond the kind of local places where it had originated.
Para concluir, porque são muitas coisas sobre o ILEAE, há 40 anos atrás, as mulheres negras que seriam candidatas para a beleza negra, né, que era um desfile, não para a beleza estética, mas para a roupa, a dança. A melhor dançarina é a escolhida. Antes, há 40 anos atrás, todas não sabiam ler nem escrever. Há 40 anos, hoje, todas são universitárias.
And to conclude, because there are lots of facets to ILEAE, one of the ways of showing how they've changed over the 40 years is in the fact that the winners of the Beleza Negra competition, which isn't a competition that determines who is the most aesthetically pleasing member of ILEAE, but more so the best dancer among ILEAE's members. Well, 40 years ago, the winners were unable to read or write and participate on that level in any of the group's work, and now they are able to do both of those things.
Many of them actually go to university, are college students and college graduates.
Eu diria que uma das referências de cultura negra na Bahia muito importante são os terreiros de candomblé, que são espaços religiosos, né, herança de diferentes nações africanas, recriadas, né, pela história cultural no Brasil e que são importantes pela preservação de uma cultura, de uma memória, né, de uma forma de educação.
So one of the important cultural references that exists to this day in Brazil are the terreiros, but particularly the terreiros involved with candomblé, which serve as a place for the kind of recreation of these kinds of references, but also serve as a way of allowing the memories of a inherited African heritage to persist and kind of evolve in Brazil to this day.
Aí são também outro tipo de instituição, né, que tem a religião católica, né, aí a irmandade, uma irmandade negra só de mulheres, de uma cidade histórica da Bahia, a Irmandade da Boa Morte, Nossa Senhora da Boa Morte.
So the name of the group, some of whose members you see here, are called the Sisterhood of the Boa Morte.
Good death.
Good death,
Sisterhood of Good
literally,
Death.
yeah. And so they are also a group consisting solely of women and of black women in northeastern Brazil.
Qual a importância dessas mulheres que saem todo ano em procissão, rezando, né, para Nossa Senhora da Boa Morte ao século XXI? Qual a importância disso?
So Dr. Conrado asks, what is the importance of the fact that there are these women who kind of express themselves through this group throughout the year in Brazil?
A saída dessas senhoras tem atraído pessoas do mundo todo que vão até Cachoeira olhar a saída delas, né, a reza, todo o ritual.
So the importance is that their work has attracted people who come to Cachoeira, que é o nome da cidade, which is the name of the city in which they have these kind of processions. So their work has attracted people who now come and see what goes on and what they do in these processions.
A minha resposta é que o fato de ser uma memória, né, de um patrimônio de corpo e não de igrejas ou monumentos físicos, mas é a memória viva de uma história cultural.
And so what is most important about their work is that what they represent is a persistent cultural memory that expresses itself through the body and not through other kind of physical representations such as like a church or monuments.
Por fim, aí também é numa outra pequena vila que se chama a dança do negro fugido.
And so in another small town, there's another type of event called the Dance of the Escaped Black.
Slave, I guess.
Slave.
Yeah.
Slave.
Na região do Acupe, que toda a comunidade, meninos, né, homens, mulheres, né, poucas mulheres, fazem essa dança do negro fugido como uma memória, né, do desejo e da luta, né, da liberdade, né, da busca, da luta pela liberdade dos negros.
And so through this dance, they continue the memory of blacks or slaves who continued to fight for their liberty during the period of slavery in Brazil.
E aí são muitos personagens, né, que fazem um teatro, dança nas ruas da comunidade, né? Então a história no Brasil, pela linguagem da dança, ela é muito corporal.
And so you can see that through the many characters and personalities in the various movements that we've seen, that the cultural memory in the Afro communities in Brazil expresses itself largely through the body.
Aí é outra imagem.
And there's another picture showing similar things.
Pode passar. Diferentemente do negro fugido, aí também já no outro estado, né, do Nordeste, estado de Pernambuco, outra forma de expressão negra, que é o maracatu.
And so in Pernambuco, which is another city in northeastern Brazil, there are other types of dances other than the dance of the escaped slave, and the one pictured here is called maracatu.
Maracatu, na verdade, é a celebração também de reis, de rainha, de uma memória africana no estado de Pernambuco.
So maracatu is a celebration of royalty, of kings and queens, but in an African context. And so what they show is...
So the kings and queens of Africa.
Right, of Africa. And so it's another sense of how cultural memory has persisted in Brazil.
Bom, essa é uma imagem do meu trabalho coreográfico junto do Balé Folclórico da Bahia. Como eu pesquiso e traduzo isso de forma cênica.
So this is a picture showing some of the work that Dr. Conrado has been involved in with the Folkloric Ballet of Bahia.
Já dançado, essa é a foto do Balé Folclórico da Bahia, que é muito conhecido no mundo.
And so, a little more about the Folkloric Ballet of Bahia. They're a world-renowned company, a dance company.
Pode passar. Eu quero dizer que falar em dança, para mim...
Não, você está terminando.
Não,
Eu vou só ajudar, para que não seja só você,
Só
tá
para
bom?
fechar.
Mas aqui tem muitos brasileiros que podem também ajudar.
Bom,
Por favor.
Nós somos tradutores profissionais, estamos só ajudando.
bom, eu falando em dança, estou falando de história, conhecimento, cultura, política. Não desatrelo a dança, questões raciais, eu não desatrelo a dança da questão de economia. Então, minha concepção de dança é atrelada a todas essas categorias.
So in speaking of dance, and in researching dance, I touch on research as a practice, education, the economy, society, and in particular races in society, and so ultimately pursuing dance as an area of study is also pursuing all these other areas of study which are linked to dance.
Eu diria que essa semana e a próxima nós trocaremos experiências corporais. Eu irei ensinar um pouco, né, das danças em que eu conheço, né, para a universidade deste lugar, né? E irei também, ou já comecei a aprender coisas muito ricas e importantes que esse lugar também tem.
So in this week and the next, during my time here, I hope to exchange with the people that I am with. For example, I've already begun to, I intend to teach about the dances that I have learned from Brazil, and I
would like to learn more from the dances that you're teaching here on these campuses also. So it's an exchange. Thank you, Juliana. So agora abrimos para bate-papo entre a gente. Você gostaria? So there's a lot of material and probably a little bit of because what we read was little sections from her chapter. Ficamos juntos, tá?
Something that needs to be made clear that she's just not an educator and a professor, but she's a dancer and
a choreographer.
So
Yes.
She studies the same thing that she does, and she does
The same
the
thing
things
that
that
she
she studies.
Absolutely, that's what meant. Well, that's why she was the subject of my last chapter for my own book, because I was looking at all these cultural agents who dance, who are dancers, getting their degree, then getting masters, then getting doctorates, and then seeing how dance, community dance, Ileaye, brings people from the streets and takes them right through an educational system that empowers them. And she's our, an example, par excellence, as they say in French, right? So yes, she started dancing. She started being a dancer, and then a choreographer, and then a professor. And so all three put together is very powerful. So that's Gloria was saying we can't miss on that. Absolutely.
Estou aberta a
So
qualquer
anybody have
pergunta,
questions?
curiosidade ou
Você tem alguma
complementações.
pergunta lá?
Tá, ou complementações.
Or a comment.
I'm from Colombia. It happens to be that now I'm working on black folk dance in Colombia. I'm a sociologist student here. And I have a couple of three questions based on my research and what she has presented here. One is if you have looked at Colombia, Peru, where there are similar folkloric expression, if you have found similarity between this country. Because you say you looked at the United States, but I wonder if you have looked at, Colombia, for example. That's one question. In terms of the diasporic connection, in terms of the way black people have responded racism in Colombia, in Peru, in Venezuela, for example, just to mention the country. The second
Okay, one
question-
second, because he needs to translate.
Mas se você tem feito esse tipo de pesquisa também, talvez não.
So her work has been very local. It's very specific to the Northeast, very specifically. So she hasn't thought yet about these transitions with Colombia and Venezuela and Peru at this point. Her work has been very, very local. Point two?
Okay. The question is, I didn't get the way this state responds to racism, especially now when we have this multiculturalism that includes, many cultural expressions and exotic forms, and that kind of make black culture, lose their political sense. So how you are, dealing with these conflicts? That's my second question. My third question is...
Okay, hold on, so she can do that one.
E se você em termos de multiculturalismo, fazer as comunidades negras como as outras e fazendo isso,
É uma questão que você fala tudo do princípio do seu texto escrito. Você coloca isso tudo no texto.
Eu venho estudando, evidente, quem faz estudos culturais, onde a referência, dos estudos afro-brasileiros e africanos, nós compreendemos que a teoria do multiculturalismo, ela surge, inclusive, nos Estados Unidos. Estamos certos disso. E, na medida em que nós compreendemos essa teoria, nós também criamos uma teoria crítica. Nós temos uma teoria crítica. E tentamos extrair o que é que pode, dentro dessa teoria, ajudar também nas nossas questões ou nos nossos diálogos, entre países ou entre estratégias, mas sem perder de vista, quando eu falo em multiculturalismo crítico, nós fazemos com que as comunidades negras, assim como a comunidade do Curuzu, na Bahia, nos interiores, no nosso debate de educação e cultura, esse entendimento ele seja qualificado e ajude a comunidade a entender o processo histórico, o processo atual e a importância de fortalecer e manter a sua memória, a sua cultura, mas como possibilidades criativas de empoderamento e de transformação. Crítica.
So recognizing the existence of this kind of multiculturalism as a kind of philosophy, especially in the United States, in Dra. Conrado's work, she has strived with others to create a sort of critical multiculturalism that rather than doing what you mentioned about kind of exoticizing communities and thus taking away their political power, using this kind of critical theory of multiculturalism to empower them through education and through an understanding of their history, of their community's history, whichever community that might be. And in particular, Dr. Conrado mentions the community of Curuzu in Bahia, which has gone along those lines of a more critical understanding of what multiculturalism can be.
So I don't know if you know.
Você se acha na faculdade da educação, na faculdade de artes. Pode explicar como você chegou lá e quais são o bom e o mal do
So this question is, you work for the faculty, the department, you work for the School of Education, that's where you have your degree. but you're a dancer. So can you explain how that happened to be and what the negotiations are? Is that the question? Does that sound right? You speak English?
Yeah, what are the benefits and the burdens?
What are the benefits and burdens of being in one school over the next, or in kind of transdisciplining?
O meu curso de formação, meu curso de formação é de educação física. Mas fora desse curso eu sempre pesquisei e estava inserida junto à dança popular, às danças afro. Então eu considero que eu tenho duas formações. E numa faculdade de educação na Bahia, existe o curso de educação física, que é um departamento da faculdade de educação.
So, Dr. Conrado's work, or coursework rather, is in physical education. But at the same time that she was pursuing more academic work in that line, she has also been involved academically and otherwise in kind of popular dancing, or popular dances. And so she considers herself to kind of bridge disciplines regardless of her kind of official membership in the education faculty. And beyond that, there is a department within the education faculty which deals in particular with physical education, which is her background.
And I want to add something, because I think that's a brilliant question. That's a really question that I don't know if it came across in what little parts we've read in her text, but I can add to it. And maybe that responds to question number 2 back there, is that the university doesn't have dance classes officially in popular dances.
Yes.
And so one of the issues at hand is that to get a university degree and become a professor, you do that within the context of what is available to you. What are the majors? What are the principal fields? And so her work in popular dances and African dances, recuperating all of this, in a way is groundbreaking, because it's work that brings into the institution what the institution continues to date, to negate. So one of the most powerful aspects, I think, of this collection and this collaboration, which, not everybody in the collaboration will be publishing, because another issue is that a lot of the activists don't write. And so that's why we write about them and we include them, right? So a lot of the activists who are doing phenomenal work aren't academics. They don't write. They're not going to come up with this kind of book, right? So there's this kind of and so when you say, how is this, kind of intersecting racism, maybe not in evident political ways, but also in ways that are incredibly political and evince the work of the community, the works of memory through the body and dance, and gives it a kind of legitimation and value that to date in the institution it doesn't have. So your question is like, it opens up Pandora's box brilliantly, because how is it that you are in the School of Ed when you do all of this work in dance? It's because her title, her opportunity to get into being able to do this from a place of legitimate authority was to get to the School of Ed, even though, not even though, and because, right? She does all of this local work. And returning to, I think, somebody that was said back there, is the tourism and exoticization. So there's this tension, right? There's a tension of the exotic, which sells, brings tourists and money, and co-optation, and she has a little section in there which we may not have translated. There is so much, and we know that there's time, and we didn't want to bore you. But there is the issue also of these would be forgotten. Some of these traditions would be forgotten because they're not all co-opted into the tourist region. So there's that tension between what's exotic and publicized, and there's what is local, what are deeper traditions, what are deeper practices, which is what this group is looking at. And so there are very many towns, Santo Amaro, que você falou, ali Cachoeira, that still hold not only the public and tourist representations, but also local representations. There's 3 days before the big event that all the tourists descend to on a bus that are actually extremely local and that need to be kept alive. So that would be the negotiations with regard to the tensions that you are asking about, and well, you nailed it when you said, well, how does this work? So, okay.
Fazer uma pergunta.
Faz muito tempo, tá bom. Should be here and there.
So I'm in Professor Suarez's class, and in a number of books we've read thus far, the U.S. is compared to Brazil and vice versa. So continuing with that theme, you brought up reparations, and in the U.S. there is a ongoing, sometimes dying, sometimes more prominent debate about reparations. And I know it's difficult because race relations in the U.S. are very different from that in Brazil, but I wonder who should pay reparations, the reparations that you mentioned, who should receive them, and you also mentioned that dancers should be paid. So who should pay the dancers? Since your work demonstrates that they're such strong cultural agents, clearly they benefit a larger part of society than they are themselves. So should that whole society pay as well?
Bom, inicialmente, não é a pesquisa que eu faço não é comparando, porque não tem como comparar, porque são histórias e lugares diferentes, apesar de termos histórias de colonização europeia.
So, Dr. Conrado's work is not, at its heart, comparing the United States to Brazil, because it is a comparison that can't be made in the sense that though both have this connection through their colonization by European powers, that doesn't kind of justify or mean that you can kind of compare them in a way that I guess makes sense in terms of in an academic context.
Mas hoje, eu entendendo que a população do Brasil economicamente se transformou, mas a população ainda continua muito precária e desigual. Então, na medida em que, pela dança, pela arte, pela cultura, pelos movimentos negros, a gente pode ter consciência da nossa história, do nosso processo histórico, né, uma consciência crítica, a gente tem condições realmente de exigir uma sociedade mais igualitária.
So, recognizing the fact that today in Brazil, the country is kind of held as a economic powerhouse in terms of kind of being a brick country, for example. At the same time, there still exists inequality, some of which was mentioned in the paper, and Dr. Conrado recognizes that through dance and through art, there's a way of kind of calling for a change in that reality, in changing the inequality that persists and that kind of dominates in Brazil today.
Okay, so who should pay?
So, quem paga mais ou menos?
A pergunta é...
Então, em termos de reparação, quem deve alguma coisa?
Você entendeu?
Deixa eu pensar como é que a gente vai responder.
Quem deveria pagar?
Quem
talvez.
deveria pagar? Bom, quem deve pagar é justamente quem acumula, né, uma quantidade realmente de dinheiro de que não lhe pertence, né? Então, assim, eu observo, eu viajei à Europa, eu estou nos Estados Unidos e vejo que a desigualdade, ou então a pobreza, ela existe no mundo todo. Mas, em regra geral, as pessoas têm um nível de qualidade de vida mais igualitário. E nós temos uma qualidade, uma realidade muito desigual. Então, quando a gente tem consciência dessa desigualdade, a gente tem poder de exigir ao poder público, às instituições, né? Por exemplo, a Petrobras, hoje, ela tem, a gente exige, enquanto movimento político e social, em que ela invista, devolva o seu dinheiro social para a comunidade negra. E o Leaie tem sido beneficiado pelo o dinheiro da Petrobras.
So, in kind of traveling to the United States and Europe, Dr. Conrado has seen this kind of, that acknowledges that there exists inequality, but it doesn't compare to that which exists in Brazil. And so what she says is that the people who should pay are those who have accumulated the wealth, and mentions in particular Petrobras, which is the, I guess, nacionalizado. So the nationalized gasoline or kind of, I guess, oil company in Brazil, that they are among those groups that should pay, and do pay, right, and do pay, and have kind of invested in communities by which they can kind of bring about change in terms of helping fix inequality. And ILE in particular has benefited from this kind of relationship and this investment from groups like Petrobras.
Eu só quero dizer que essa exigência é uma luta, é um embate e que não é fácil, né? Mas nós estamos caminhando para justamente em luta desse nível de educação, esse nível de acesso à história. Né?
And so this kind of fight to fix inequality is not an easy one, but it is one that we continue to fight, and that's all.
Yeah, so it's so there's that request that who pays, it's these people should be paying, these institutions should be paying. Is that easy? No. Do they pay? Not often.
Well,
but
it's much more obvious. You like the fact that you were able to come up with an answer surprised me, because we in the United States in our reparations debate we don't have an answer of who should pay, and
So I'm
it's
not
much
sure-
more complicated. Like as far as racial relations are involved.
right. So I guess it's not my field, and I'm not sure that it's hers. The question is, what is the reparation debate in Brazil? Is there one, and how does? So I don't know if someone else in the audience who works on Brazil
I think that is, I'm not going to
answer that question. I
No,
can't.
but
I know that I
I
can't.
think that one of the things that Professor Amelia is pointing out, and it's like, we lose a lot in translation, and
Right.
that's normal. So I'm really hoping that we can all support the translation work, because it's really hard and you're doing a wonderful job, but things are lost in the way.
Well,
And I think
in parentheses, the Amherst College has given us a FRAP, or given me a FRAP, so we have a professional translator officially translating the
Right.
4 essays from, so that,
Yeah.
in writing and in text,
Right.
I don't think things will be lost necessarily, but this is a talk.
Yeah, right. So I just
Besides, I
would
think
like
that-
to add that she pointed out that it's a work of raising awareness, and it's a struggle. So I think that's very important to know that struggle is within the beauty of all those reclaims and claims for reparation in Brazil. It's not like you go to institutions and you ask for money. It's like there is a movement that has been built. Estou falando do movimento negro, não é, que é histórico, que é uma reclamação por reparação histórica. So I think that's a very important piece in what you're saying.
So what you're saying is
That's
cultural,
right.
sociocultural reparation
Right.
first.
That's
Right.
Eu diria, complementando o que ela diz, que o movimento negro de São Paulo a gente considera um movimento negro contemporâneo a partir da década de 70, mas todas as ações que sempre a comunidade negra fez, de organizações em terreiros de candomblé, na manutenção do samba, na manutenção do corpo, da língua, da comida, né? Isso é movimento negro. Pra gente isso é movimento.
You want to translate?
Sure. So this kind of movement that we've been talking about, this movement to bring about an awareness, of black communities and of various black cultures that have existed in Brazil kind of formally began in the 1970s, but really that is a continuation of other processes that predated that, such as kind of continuing the traditions of samba and of candomblé, and also beyond dance and music.
De fazer um acarajé, fazer as comidas.
Food.
Yeah, like for example, food and language also play into this long history of maintaining this kind of culture and cultural memory in these various communities in Brazil.
Which is what, when the picture that she showed about the negro fugido it's about. It's physical cultural memory, and the movements embody. The word is embody, and in dance studies there's a whole field of study in terms of embodiment, which recognizes that it can't be verbal, but it's very important.
Thank you for your attention.
So Gloria had something to say, you have been wanting to say something, and then back there I've seen your hands.
Well, I want to say something, but I also want to say that we have dinner after we end, so don't leave too quickly. No, but I was going to say that when we talk about reparations, that word has that sound of money. But she was talking about that first, you're dealing with the cultural and social reparation of these people. And it's much harder to talk about it.
Ela está falando que a questão da reparação, ela está falando sobre o dinheiro econômico, mas é muito mais difícil, mas muito mais profundo mesmo, a questão da reparação cultural, sociocultural do povo. Sim.
Eu sou Flávia.
Do you want to translate your own questions? So
I
that
will
goes,
translate
I would love
myself.
that. Thank you. So we don't have to wait.
Relax.
We're relaxed.
Sou Flávia, paraibana, sou aluna de doutorado aqui, já faz um tempo. Se Deus quiser termino. Mas obrigada pela sua fala. E a minha pergunta vai um pouco nessa direção dessa última conversa. Que as danças e as manifestações folclóricas no Brasil, elas são seculares, né? Elas existem há muito séculos. Então, estão presentes na comunidade. Então, quando você a academia, né? A instituição acadêmica traz esse conhecimento que é secular e pode ser até milenar, porque vem da África, traz para os espaços acadêmicos como objeto de estudo, né? Como é que você navega essa questão, né, do poder, do território do poder do saber acadêmico, teorizando o que já é saber popular, secular na nossa cultura? So my question is about how she personally and professionally navigates the space of academic the relations of power in the academic space when you bring to that space something that has existed forever, for centuries, such as the dances folklóricas, the folkloric dances, all the knowledge that is has been in the communities for centuries. So, and then the academy goes there and transforms that as an object of study, of academic study, academic research.
E a questão que você teve lá na última vez, lá na questão de capoeira, a questão do que é coisa popular e o que é coisa academia, não? Essa questão.
Eu diria que, para a Flávia, prazer muito grande, para a nordestina, dizer que nas relações de poder, quando nós tratamos dessa temática na academia, eu diria que o fato dessa inserção é também o resultado de uma luta. E aqui tem muitos professores acadêmicos, né, em que com a nossa presença, com a nossa temática, né, nós podemos ser um agente de tanto impedir a entrada, né, de temas como esse, como possamos ser um agente de abertura. Então, essas relações de poder vai da sensibilidade. E eu diria que na Bahia, no Brasil, quando os nossos temas chegam, é porque existe uma luta realmente no Brasil, exigindo que trate, que reconheça essa história e que seja tratada no currículo das escolas e da universidade.
And so, in kind of trying to bring these studies of things that have existed prior to their insertion into curricula in schools, there's just as much the possibility that the people who take up these studies block their continued existence in academia and their kind of flourishing in academia, as there is the possibility that they open up possibilities for further studies of these kind of cultures and their memories. And so
it's really important the fact that these materials make it to the academy is an opening, it's an aperture, and it's important, it's necessary.
And it's a testament to the fact that there has been this kind of battle for their existence and for their presence at all in this realm, in the academic realm.
So Flavia, is there anything missing in that translation? Did you want to add something else?
I don't know.
Well, because she spoke to you and you could hear it.
Well,
What do you think of
we can continue the conversation.
So there was
in
one
an
more
informal way.
hand that's been wanting to speak. Look, I mean, I think that we should all, work as a community and help each other with the translations, since we don't have a professional, right?
All I know is English, so.
That's good. We'll translate backwards.
Okay.
I mean, in the other direction. All good. All fabulous.
I was hoping to see, I don't know if you've answered any questions because I came a little bit late. I was hoping to see like some snippets of actual dance. We saw stills, and as we know, dance is moving. So if there was some video clips, that would be better to understand these dances and stuff. They seem to be more of a social political context, and I'm grateful that you are preserving this cultural identity or cultural uniqueness to anywhere in the world. And I would like to say also too is if you have to know is, do these dances originate independently of Africa and they're unique and Brazilian and on their own, and also did you trace the origins to these dances? Because Africa is extremely wide culturally, as far as so many little pockets here and there and stuff, and to see where to find the exact origins to maybe a country or region in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, even be more specific.
So, well, we're gonna, as far as the videos, we're gonna try to look for them as I translate.
I have tons on my, but it has to be through Moodle, and I don't know that I can get into the UMass wireless. Yeah, I mean, I have tons of videos. We have them for my class. And you can actually find Ileaye online in YouTube. So I would have to get onto my wireless, and I'm from Amherst, so I can't get it. But I would recommend, and they're fabulous, is just go to YouTube and put Ileaye, and they have lots of the different dances. Also Ballet Folklorico de Bahia, that has been here at UMass at least 3 times in the last 10 years. There are videos on YouTube of their stuff, and there's materials on them through the UMass Arts. So I can't get into the wireless, but she'll be teaching dance classes here at the 5 colleges, so that's sort of the component, was classes that she's teaching versus work that she's doing. It's sort of the 2 components, but it's an excellent question. And he's translating your questions so that you can get that.
I think that we know.
Yeah? So do you want to do a quick 5 minutes? Você fala uns 5 minutos, depois cantamos para que ela não fique fora, não?
Okay.
So 5 minutes, a quick 5 minutes, and you know what? We have dinner, and we can all continue to talk, okay? So, but I really want to make sure that our last question gets addressed in
Eu vou responder a questão dela e podemos encerrar.
Exatamente, é isso que estamos fazendo. Então, I can't get into our Wi-Fi, so sorry.
Dizer que a presença africana no Brasil foi muito grande, de várias regiões da costa, né, Angola, Congo, e nas diversas regiões do Brasil, se hoje, né, nos estudos contemporâneos, a gente consegue localizar, evidente, de que povos, né, chegaram com a colonização, né? Essa é a primeira questão. No Maranhão, em Sergipe, em Pernambuco, em Bahia, em Rio de Janeiro. Não sei se você pode dizer isso.
Sabe. Sorry. So, various groups from different parts of Africa continue to exist, but came to Brazil, and so it is possible to some extent, distinguish among the communities that exist in Brazil where in Africa they have origins. And in particular, Dr. Conrado mentions Angola and the Congo as places where these kind of distinct communities, where there are communities that kind of retain characteristics distinct to where they come from in Africa. But Brazil is a big place, and so in the various regions of Brazil, there's kind of there are a lot of variables as far as kind of how these expressions have come to be. And Dr. Conrado mentioned cities such as Pernambuco, Sergipe, Rio de Janeiro, where they're, I mean, as kind of centers for these investigations and for trying to distinguish or put together what their origins are from various places in Africa.
Dizer que as danças foram recriadas, reinventadas. Hoje, por exemplo, o nome a gente chama samba, mas a gente sabe que samba é uma palavra que existe em Angola, por exemplo.
So,
And I think this statement will close, hold on, it's the last statement.
So the dances that came over to Brazil from Africa, in doing so, and since they're arriving in Brazil, they have been reinvented and kind of reconfigured, recreated by the groups that maintain or that keep them alive. But for example, the word samba, it comes from an African word semba, and so in that sense, there's acknowledgement that there's kind of a direct connection to Africa, but at the same time, there's also acknowledgement of the fact that that connection to Africa has been kind of reconfigured by the groups that have taken on those cultural practices and that kind of keep those cultural memories around in Brazil.
Dizer que assim como eu, Lucia e muitos pesquisadores têm trabalhado uma pesquisa assim muito cuidadosa e, por exemplo, recentemente tem um capoeirista que foi a Angola pesquisar as origens de danças que poderiam fazer com que explicassem a capoeira no Brasil. E ele filmou mais de 20 danças e a gente consegue identificar na linguagem corporal africana elementos que hoje somam-se, são similares à capoeira no Brasil, mas que a capoeira a gente acredita que como ela só tem lá, ela foi reinventada daquela maneira. Igual, definitiva, mas similares e recriadas.
Right, and so Dr. Conrado was mentioning that there is someone who's collaborated with her who practices capoeira has gone to, a researcher has gone to Angola and there filmed lots of dances in order to kind of try and ascertain what goes on in Brazil today came from in the communities that he visited in Africa. And they have been able, through his work, through the researcher's work, to kind of identify certain characteristics, and in terms of dance, their movements that come from the various kind of places that in Angola that the researcher visited and was able to document.
I want to thank everybody for fabulous questions, for your attention, for being here, for translation, and
Thank you very much.